Now that I have my first camera pass done, I'm going to duplicate this comp and call it camera pass 02. Double click to get into it, and this is where I can start really smoothing things out, adjusting motion paths, easing keyframes, and making it all flow from one phrase to the next. So let's start at the beginning. Now I'm going to disable the audio just because that's going to get in the way at this point. I'm not really worried about it. Now I don't necessarily need to ease in and out of the start of a phrase into the end of a phrase. It's more easing between phrases. If I play this back, you can see that's very jarring. So I need to make sure that from this keyframe to this keyframe is nice and smooth. And that's going to be a combination of easing as well as motion path modification. So let's just start with the easing. First of all, I want to convert these two keyframes, the position and orientation, to auto Bezier. And to do that, just hold down Command or Control and click on that set of keyframes once. Now they're circles instead of diamonds, and that means that they are now continuous Bezier keyframes. If you don't know what that means, I'll just go into the graph editor for the position value, and you see that this is what the other keyframes look like, the linear keyframes that had no easing at all. Auto Bezier just took the speed and kind of smoothly transitioned from the speed between these two keyframes and the speed of these two keyframes. It's not very nice. If I play it back, you can see that it's still pretty jarring, but it's a starting point. And what it does do is link the incoming and outgoing velocities of these handles. Now if your graph doesn't look like mine, it's probably because you're set to value graph. Make sure that you're on the speed graph if this is the type of graph you want to see. So I want to smooth this out so that it's not as jarring of a transition. If you're not used to working in the graph editor, this is something that I cover in even another one of my classes. Check out Animating with Ease, where I show you how all of the graph editor works and how to completely control all of the motion inside of After Effects so that your motion ends up exactly the way that you want it to look. But basically I want all of these keyframes to be continuous Bezier so that the incoming and outgoing velocities are linked, and then I want all of these curves to look smooth, nothing boxy like this. So I'm going to get out of this and actually just convert all of these keyframes to continuous Bezier. Select all of them, Command or Control click, so they're all round. Now I'll go back into my graph editor, and I'm just going to worry about the position for now, so I'll just click on that property. Zoom in nice and close so I'm just focused on one transition at a time. And we can see that the speed is now going at a pretty constant pace between the first two keyframes, then it speeds up real fast and then slows down real fast. I want to ease that transition, so I'm going to grab this keyframe, pull it down, and then the outgoing influence, I'm just going to push that out a little bit, so that the fastest point of this motion is right in the middle of that transition. So I pulled this one out this way, I pulled that one out that way, and now we've got this nice mountain curve or peak curve. And this transition should be a lot smoother now. It's a much more gradual transition from slow to fast. If I play it back, there we go. It is pretty drastic, but it's a lot smoother than before. So that works great. It is still a little jarring right there, and that's because of the orientation property. That also needs to be smoothed out. So let's switch over to orientation, and you'll notice that everything is changing at a constant speed. And that's because even though I've set it to continuous Bezier, all of the rotation is completely linear. I'm going to have to modify the speed of these keyframes, or the velocity of the keyframes, in order to get it to ease in and out of motions. So at this keyframe, I don't want it to be rotating in one direction and then just suddenly shift to rotating in a different direction. I want to ease that transition. So to do that, I'm going to bring this down all the way. I could even just select it and press F9 to ease it, and then I can kind of just modify my curve like this. And now if I play this back, that transition is a lot smoother. Now I'm going to need to modify these other keyframes as well, because now the orientation shift from here to here is very jarring. So I've got to ease in and out of these keyframes as well. So to make this process a little simpler, I'm just going to select all of my orientation keyframes and ease them by pressing F9. And now we've got all of these nice arches for our speed graph on all of the orientation. And we can take a look at how that is playing back. So there you go. Those first two camera moves are now a lot smoother, and we can further modify this to be more or less eased. So maybe I want this first camera move to be a little bit faster getting into this ease. And on this one, maybe the opposite. We'll have it ease more on the front end and less on the back end. I don't actually like the way that looks, so I'm going to take that off. I don't want that drastic of an ease, and most of them are going to probably be pretty symmetrical. But that's the basic process with the position and orientation keyframes. But we can still shape this motion a little bit more using that motion path. Now, doing this in the active camera view is a little bit dangerous, and I'll show you why. Let's say that I want to kind of curve this path, because even though my keyframes are no longer linear, the actual spatial interpolation is linear. Remember, because of that preference that I have set. It's always moving in a straight line from point A to point B to point C. I have to introduce those Bezier handles into my motion path in order to shape the motion path. So I'm going to switch to my pen tool and click on that keyframe, and you can kind of see the way that this is shaped. Now, the reason why this is a little dangerous is because I'm looking at this in a two-dimensional view, but I'm trying to modify something that's in 3 dimensions. So it's basically just going to take whatever angle of view my comp is currently looking at and apply a 2D transformation to it. So I can try to bring this Bezier handle in, and as I do this, you can see it's drastically modifying the position of my camera. But that's really not going to cut it. So let me switch to my 2 views and change this one to the top. It's already there, so let me just zoom out until I can see the camera. And now I can shape this from the top down, so this will give me access to the X and the Z axis. And I can see that my motion path is now doing this crazy little loop. So I don't want the camera to be moving back on this first phrase and then forward, at least not that much. So I'm going to select that keyframe in this top-down view, and I need to modify this Bezier handle so that this is a less extreme arch. Let me reposition this so we can see it easier. But now this motion path is arching a little less drastically, but it's curving very nicely from this point into that point. And looking at it from this view, I can see that my motion path is dipping and then moving up. So in this view, I'm just going to click and drag it so that it's kind of a nice curve from this angle as well. And as soon as I can see that my motion path is nice and smooth in these 2 different perspectives, I can know that that's probably going to be a smooth camera move. So let's play that back and see the difference. There we go. So we've got a nice smooth camera move here, and it eases through that motion path both spatially and through the actual spacing of the keyframes because we modified that speed graph. And now we have a very nice buttery smooth camera movement from point A to point B all the way to point C. Now I'm just going to repeat this process for this shot. So I'm going to grab that second keyframe, bring up my 2 views so I can see them both at once, and I want to smooth this out. Now this is where you really got to get familiar with these camera tools. I'm cycling through them just by tapping the C key, but this way I can quickly reposition my scene so it's in the center of this view, and I can get in nice and tight and just make sure that this is all working well. So I'm going to introduce some handles here, and we're going to get this crazy loop because the Bezier handles went so far out. But I'm just going to back it up, back this one up, and try and make something nice and smooth for this motion as well. And at this point, I might want to consider grabbing this path point and just clicking and dragging it to modify it just a little bit so that it's a little bit smoother here. Now it is shaping this portion of the motion path a little, but I think it's subtle enough that that will actually work just fine. Let's play that back. Yeah, that's working really well. So the camera's coming through, doing this little tiny arch, and then smoothly transitioning right there through the text. And now I'm just going to repeat that process over and over again until all of the shots are covered and all of the camera movements are looking nice and smooth. Now something I do need to take note of is that this layer is getting cut off before the camera's moved completely past it. So I like to make it a habit of keeping layers on until the next camera move where I'm sure that they're no longer visible. So I'm going to go to that next set of keyframes for each one of these text layers and trim those layers to that point. So hold down Option or Alt on a PC, press the right bracket with layers selected, and that moves the out point to the point in time that your scrubber is at. That way I know that this set of text is going to stay on screen until the camera's well beyond it. Okay, so here's where I ended up. Let's get back to our one view and play this back.
You can call me stupid. Yes, you can call me cheap. You can say I'm lazy. You can say I'm weak. You think that using her would get to me. And if you're right, then you're in trouble, D. 'Cause I won't break, no, I know I won't wait. You're in trouble, D.
Okay, so that's my process of smoothing out all the motion. Remember that you need to ease your keyframes, making sure that your position keyframes are set to auto Bezier and they have nice curves that are nice and smooth if you want that camera movement from one keyframe to the next to actually be smooth. But then you also have to think about the motion path and make sure that the spatial interpolation between keyframes is nice and smooth, that you have nice curves with all of your motion paths. Also remember that your orientation will need to be eased, and depending on the camera movement, you might need to actually mess with those curves as well. But that is how I would do my second camera pass on a project like this, and as you can see, I've got very drastically different results with this version just by modifying the way that the camera is moving.